to the place where singles shine, celebrating life, divine by design. In faith and love, we intertwine. Route 77, where your journey's prime.
Welcome to another episode of the Route 77 podcast. Today, we're diving into a crucial and timely topic, temptation, especially as it relates to singleness and the desire for marriage. We'll be exploring how these desires can lead to various temptations and how we can navigate these challenges with a biblical perspective. So get comfortable and join us as we discuss how to stay steadfast in our faith while navigating the complexities of temptation. Welcome to the Route 77 podcast. I am your host, Natasha, and I am here with Monique. Hello. And David.
Hello.
And today's topic is about temptation. And for me, it came up, I was reading this book called Swipe Right. It says The Life and Death Power of Sex and Romance. And it's just basically like how to train today for the relationship you want tomorrow. So it is more about relationships and things, but it's actually talking about like building the type of person that you are. And the first chapter is called You Don't Want What the Devil's Got in His Crock Pot. And it was basically a lot of that talked about was talking about Jacob and Esau. And he says, watch out for the Esau syndrome. And Esau wanted what he wanted now. It's just he has this really good saying in here, now yells louder, but later lasts longer. And I guess the first thing is like temptation is actually really fits into that of like Esau was tempted by what Jacob offered in his soup pot, wanting the fulfillment of the moment greater than the long-term birthright. Like he didn't, in the moment, he didn't see the preciousness or the value of what he would get tomorrow, so to speak, over the immediate desire to have his current desires fulfilled, which was hunger. And I think when it comes to being a single person looking for marriage, when you start to get into that mindset that Esau was in, where it was like, I'm so hungry, I'm going to die. We're pretty sure he wasn't that hungry by reading it. You're probably like, he's being a little over dramatic. But how many times I've come across this on so many singles Facebook pages where they're like, I'm so desperate for a spouse. What do I need to do to get the spouse? Who's out there? Come now. I need this. And they're like, on TikTok, they're like crying in the TikTok about how they need that relationship. And how much do we overlook in the moment because all we want to do is fulfill that desire of being married, that we overlook red flags, we overlook God's calling in our lives, like we overlook so many things because of the now versus the future. And it could follow with, I think, any temptation actually falls into that desire to fill the moment versus what God wants for us for the future or the long term. It can equal like pornography or the love of money or anything that could be a temptation. Is a lot about just feeling like you're in that overwhelming need. If you don't fulfill this need right now, you will die.
Or that it'll never happen. And if it doesn't, and if it never happens, then what does that look like? I can't deal with, what if I never find anybody ever and I'm alone like forever? And so I have to find somebody like right now because I have to have somebody now, because if it takes too long, then I'm never going to have kids and I'm never going to have that marriage and I'm going to just be alone and I'm going to die alone and nobody's going to care about me. I'm pretty sure.
I believe you call that cutting corners.
Yes, you did.
You can't do that. From experience, you cannot do that.
No.
You can't cut corners like doing your programming, David?
What happens when you cut corners?
You would spend more time trying to reshape that corner or graft that corner back into your life than you would just originally not skipping the corner.
If that's what happened.
Cutting.
I wonder if that's what happened with CrowdStrike.
Maybe with this software bug.
Did you hear about that one, David?
Yeah.
Proud straight?
Oh, yes.
Praise him.
So it says in James, I guess we can go back to James 1 verse 12. Blessed is the
Yeah,
man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive the crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God. For God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. But each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it has conceived, gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is fully grown, brings forth death. And it goes on. I think there's a good section to read for what people want to go back and read that one. But it's just interesting how we're promised good things if we wait on things, or if we make it through things like trials and temptations. But there's so many times that we just think that. And it's funny because I think if we asked ourselves in this moment, would I be tempted by X that we maybe find ourselves tempted by, whether it's pornography or overeating, or, as I say, to me, sugar. And they're like, no, I can definitely say no to it. I don't need it. But then what happens is, like, in the moment, you go, oh, I desperately crave sugar. I'm just going to eat that sugar because I can't possibly not have sugar. My body obviously wants sugar, so I'm going to eat that sugar. It's not like sugar is a bad thing. But if it's something like I struggle with, because I have a very big sweet tooth, so I'm trying to lose weight, so I constantly crave sugar, I don't say no very often. And in the moment, I desperately need sugar. Instead of finding a healthier version of sugar, like fruit, which could probably appease the sugar craving, I'll go for the easy, less healthy option.
Yeah, but that's why Christ introduced fasting and prayer.
Chip.
You have to be pretty disciplined to do that. I can really, and it's funny because we're talking about temptation, because I stepped on the scale and went, look, and went, yeah, we gotta lose weight. And I'm wondering why my knees are so sore. That might have something to do with it.
I'm in the same boat as you with me.
Well, Master Jose, his wife, downloaded this app, and he said she's done really well. Like, she's lost 10 pounds since she started this kind of thing. And I'm like, yeah, all these calorie counting, whatever.
One is just like the other one.
Yeah, which is what it's just another app.
When you follow none of them, then they'll never work.
Okay, you can only try things once, and I'm really tired of how my knees feel, knowing that the reason why my knees are hurting so much is because I've put on a little bit more weight since Amber's surgery. I thought, I'm going to download this app, and I set my calories. So I'm at work, and one of the reps from the distributor came with a box of donuts. Wonderful. This app actually shows you the calories for things like Tim Hortons donuts, believe it or not. So I went, oh, maybe I'll just the plain cake one, because, well, that's still just under 300 calories. For a snack, I only have, and how many calories do I have left? And I still got to have dinner.
If you want to avoid calories, don't order chicken wings from 7-Eleven. Like 8 chicken wings is like 9,000 calories from 7-Eleven. Serious. My brother checked.
Oh, my word.
It is not.
I'm very glad that I am not addicted to 7-Eleven food, because I already did really horrible the first 2 days because I put it in afterward, and I knew I had done horrible because I'd eaten like too much sugar. Like, I was over by the thousands or anything. It was like a few hundred calories over. Yep. And I'm usually a little more active than I have been the last couple of days. It's my shoulder bothering me.
I think my first day on it, I did go over just about 100 calories. But the next night, I was a little bit less tempted, and was actually able to keep it a couple points under. And this time, like today, I've actually got 300 calories left. It's now out in the evening, and I'm like, I don't know if I need to have anything, because I think I'm good now. I'm done. The determination to lose weight is huge right now, because this is the heaviest I've ever been. And I used to be like 100 pounds soaking wet. I can't remember the last time I saw that number. So now I want to do it. So I'm telling everybody here so y'all can encourage me and pray for me, because this is a very serious matter. Because if you're a Christian and Christian music, we all know that Mandisa passed away not that long ago. And the cause of her death was complications from obesity. And we have heart disease in my family. We have other things as well.
My mom and dad's they high cholesterol and diabetes, the late onset diabetes. So I'm trying to do this too, especially because I see like the pictures of me and the demo team stuff, and I'm just like, oh my word, I don't want to be that person.
I don't even have to look at pictures. I'm just looking at the video thing for this thing, and I see myself there.
If I keep my head up, I'm not too bad. If I look lower, then I'm
that's not working. I have to sit really low.
just go like this. Just put it up and then it will.
I can feel my dollar.
Put your tongue at the roof of
It's
your
not-
mouth
it's-
and try to push it as
I
hard as
gotta make
possible.
it maybe go to the ceiling.
People
All
listening,
I have
whatever is
to all I have to do is walk past a window, and I can tell, just like you've put on weight.
desperately don't want them to put the weight mirrors at the dojang.
No. So it's now gotten to a point where this is a little bit more serious, because I'm an older age and I don't feel the age that I'm at, but I am walking like I'm 20 years older than I am. So I know that if I don't do something about this now, I will be crippled in my old age, and I don't want to be. And I want that 2nd degree black belt. And I can't do a 2nd degree black belt if I can't walk.
Just garden. My grandfather gardens. He's 85 to 90, and he still walks to get groceries and all that stuff.
Monique likes gardening. She just doesn't have time.
Yeah.
With 2 jobs.
And that's the other bad thing too, is that for all of my jobs, I have
I was sitting on the desk.
I think because I sit for all of my jobs, I don't move enough, and I need to move more. I need to not sit for such long periods of time. I need to get up and walk around a little bit and then continue on with my work, because it's causing more issues by not walking either, because all that weight just goes and sits in your butt. It's a bad place for it. So temptation right now, when you're trying to lose weight, can be a huge thing if you don't have.
It's like anything, like we fall to the moment. Like it says in these verses that when they're tempted, they'll be dragged away by their own evil desire and enticed. It says then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin.
Yeah.
And it's like we move from like a healthy desire for something, or I would like that, but I could live like not have it, but then it becomes like where it's the unhealthy part of it.
Right.
And I think that's like when it comes to something like pornography, which I said I've been like, I was trapped in that for a long time and I still struggle with it on occasion. But when I say on occasion is because 99.9% of the time, I have zero desire or thought or anything towards it. But then something will trigger, and then there'll be this cascade of stuff going on in my head about just basically don't think, just do. And then I fall into it. Like it's been a long time since I have, but it hasn't been a long time since I've had the temptation. It's important to understand that these things are like a lot of temptation, especially something that we fall to regularly or more habitually, I guess is a better word. It's not like it's always 24/7 tempting you. You could be like days of nothing and 1 minute of being tempted and then you fall to the temptation. It's nothing like you haven't been tempted for 5 days then managed to stave it off, but it was like these things happen. And I think like when I talk about like singleness and desire for marriage, you could be like all in your head, I'm going to be like looking for a proper person, doing it in a way that's godly, not just take anybody. But then as the struggle, or my little brother getting engaged and married or having a child, like all of a sudden it's those things which will trigger a more rash action that can lead to things like Esau just being like, I'm so starving, I'll just give you anything because otherwise I'm going to die. So what use is tomorrow? Like, it's just really, I'm pretty sure that he wasn't going to be at that close to death. Or Jacob would have been that hard-hearted to see his brother so close to death that he was willing to bargain with him.
Sell me your birthright and I'll give you a bowl of soup. Obviously, the birthright didn't mean that much to him because it was something that I guess he would have to wait too long for, where a bowl of stew was right there in front of him.
Yes. And I guess that's why I like what he says, now yells louder, but later lasts longer.
Yeah.
Like the now things is what we, like when temptation happened, it's not about maybe next week you should spend that money that you shouldn't spend or eat that food you shouldn't eat or go onto that pornographic site. It's about now, like this instant.
Yeah.
And the incredible emotions that come up within those instantaneous time frames that you fall to. You're not being tempted to do something next week.
Interesting. As soon as you brought James up, because it says James is implying some kind of like physical or outward way of countering this in a sense. Like this temptation is from the outward aspect. Someone is tempting you, or someone is offering you food, or someone brings donuts. But then Jesus also teaches that there's not just temptation on the outward, there's also inward, right? So how are these things parallel to each other, and how can we like understand these two different forms of temptation?
Yeah. There is like the outward, like a person offering what it is that you shouldn't have, like literal person or literal person on the internet too, if it's not into that type of thing. But there is the, like your internal person, your internal sinful nature's like the best at tempting. Like it knows all of your buttons to press. Like somebody might be like, here, have a donut. Are you sure you don't want the donut? Like they don't know what's going to work on you unless they know you like really well.
You stand there for 5 to 10 minutes trying to justify why you should or should not have a donut. And then everyone's, what is that person doing?
And for me, it was like the box of donuts was half open on the counter so you could see the donuts. Can you see the donuts? Can you smell the donuts? And I'm just like, keep watching.
Especially if you didn't have time for breakfast or whatever. If you were hungry, that's even worse.
But I think that's one of the very significant aspects of why Jesus teaches us to fast and in prayer. Because he ultimately knew that when you fast, you're also combating one of the strongest desires of the human body, which is hunger, right? So once you're able to conquer hunger, you're able to conquer a lot of other things. But it also mentions that to combat any of this stuff, you need to go to Scripture. You cannot conquer it alone. There's also accountability, community, but primarily Scripture.
Yeah, and then this one, for our pillars, we would say this would fall under our accountability pillar, I think, would be the first of them. But that's what Monique and I are doing. We're not like keeping accountable to each other on the calorie counting app, but by doing it at the same time, I see her doing it and I'm like, oh, I gotta be better at what I'm doing. It's like it's hard to explain. It's not like a direct accountability. Oh, I need to go and tell somebody I fell off the calorie wagon or something. But
I think the biggest win for me when starting this was that I saw already 5-pound drop. That I feel like I'm not anticipating it to be like that every day because that would be crazy. But that I actually saw a dramatic change just by doing it 1 day, 2 days. That it was almost like see, this could work. This is encouraging. Even though I probably won't see the weight I want to be until October. Thank you very much. Still, I saw that it did, like something happen. So that was more, I avoided the donut and I cut back to 1 cup of coffee a day. When we come back next week, I'll let you know if I've lost more weight.
how we're doing on the calorie counting.
Yeah.
I actually put it in today. I didn't put in the ice cream cones that I had, but when I had lunch, I put it in as we were doing it so I can see, not like at the end of the day and put it all in and be like, oh, I went over.
Yeah.
Too late now.
We have a bag of cherries And one cherry is 5 calories. So if I have 300, I can have 30 cherries. Let's not go that crazy, shall we? So yeah, I think I can do 10 cherries. I think that would work later on if I feel hungry, because right now I'm not.
Yeah. And I think too, it shows how when we're talking about accountability, or like David mentioned, community can help to encourage. We got encouragement from Master Jose through his wife, Instructor Valentina. And Monique and I have encouragement off each other. At least I hope I'm encouraging, but she's encouraging me. When two people are going through it, it's like our joint house account. It's easier for us to save money within that account because we're accountable to each other than it is with our own specific money.
Right?
Like, we don't grill each other on how we use the money. Like, we just have a joint idea of what money gets put onto the house account. But then we won't be like always going overboard like we tend, or at least I tend to do in my own finances. But there's a joint accountability there, which helps.
Yeah. And we know what it's there for and why we have it and why we need to keep our hands off of it. But we have our own money, and that's a whole other ball of wax. There's another temptation in there, because when you need something, it's really hard to say you're just going to have to wait, but I really need it. Do I really need it? I haven't needed it until now. So do I really need it? Can I wait until I'm saved?
And sometimes that even applies to things like sexual desire. Like, we sit there and we think that physical discomfort or extreme physical drive is an indication that we must follow it through.
Right.
Instead of saying, I'm not an animal, I can control myself. And then the feeling does pass. But we'll use that as, see, we have to, like, we'll be unhealthy if we don't express this part of ourselves and biology and whatever words they like to use as a, like, excuse. But we use this idea, like, it's harder to say no to that donut when you're so hungry that all you're thinking about is, I just need some food, than it is if we've kept ourselves fed regularly with less calorie food. And so I think too, we can't just go, oh, we just go have sex and then we won't feel the burning desire for sex, but for all the other options that are out there.
And that is completely and purely self-gratification that has absolutely nothing to do with another person.
But it's meaningless in a sense too, because it's temporary.
Yeah.
The very temporary nature of it is just, it's like, you're not solving anything.
You're just scratching an itch and then going off on your own. Like, yeah.
And then we can look at 1 Corinthians 6:18-20. Flee from sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. And we see, I always find it interesting, like they say, like, everything else you do is for outside the body, outside yourself. But when it comes to sexual immorality, it's just a very different type of sin, in the sense that you're committing the sin against your own body as well as God. So you're hurting yourself more than in any other circumstance. And that's why it's so hard whenever you deal with the desire, especially whenever you're like young and brave or vulnerable. Like, those desires they're super, super strong. And sometimes you feel like, this is insane. Of course I need to get married. Like, why else would I have these needs and desires if God didn't want me to get married? And then some things happen where you just really want to get married, whether it's for the sexual side of it or just that you're looking for a relationship and a marriage thing. And then sometimes you can even make allowances before marriage.
I want to challenge that one thought. I keep hearing that, and I'm going, is that really true? That God gives us the desire to be married?
I think that God gives us, like, I think there's a natural desire for it, but I don't know if it's specifically from God, if it's something he wants us to do and then doesn't give it to us. But I think the desire to be a parent, the desire to be married,
it's built in from the time of when they were ejected from the garden to go forth and fill the earth. It's something that but it's not an innate desire that God plants in you saying, oh, you are the one, you must be married. And then
Because I think people like they misinterpret. I think that their body's sexual desire means that they obviously have a desire for marriage because that's the only outlet for it from a Christian perspective. And so they it's, I don't know what would be an equivalent, like your hunger for food. It means that like God must want you to just eat all the food or any food. Any food is allowed instead of good food just because you're hungry. Any food's okay.
as human beings, we have certain things that are just natural desires. The desire to eat and drink because they help us to live. The desire to breathe because you gotta breathe to live. And when you are a young person going through puberty, you got hormones happening. Those hormones are what drives parents crazy because the kids are just insane. It's, who are these children? They cannot be mine. Any parent will tell you, yes, no, I can relate to that. But to say that because I have this desire to procreate, I just need that's just your hormones talking. And you just need to do something else until they quiet themselves down because your body is just going through changes. And those changes are going to stay with you until you're
even like for a woman, like their hormones go up and down throughout their cycle, and there will be a time of the month that you're open to those things. Your body, so the hormones fluctuate. But it doesn't mean just because your body regulates properly that
it means you gotta have baby.
It means you have to get married or that you have to engage in the sexual act because you have these desires. Like it doesn't mean that if you have the desire, you have to.
Having these desires are normal. They're a part of life. They're a part of growing up as a woman. And any other woman will tell you, God, if I'm never going to have any kids, why don't you just take that part of me away?
Look at Paul. Paul acknowledges that some people, even though you say that you can resist these things, sometimes they're too strong. And Paul acknowledges this. He recognizes that some people. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 9, but if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it is better to marry than it is to burn with passion. So in this context, Paul is discussing singleness and marriage. If you're single but you burn with passion, then it is better for you to marry than it is for you to burn with that passion. Because this is backed by Jesus' teaching on the Sermon on the Mount again. For if you look with lust, then your heart is affected, and by your heart, your mind, and by your mind, your spirit, and by spirit, your action.
I would just say if you get married because you have this insatiable sexual desire that you need to get married, then that's not a great reason to get married, or that it's a great, like, if you can't control it, like marriage doesn't fix it.
No, because a lot of times when you have that kind of attitude that you can't control it, being married to one person isn't where you stop. Because eventually that person is not going to be able to fulfill and you're going to go off to others. If you've got that kind of where you just can't keep control of yourself, might require psychological help.
But again, I have to refer back to what Paul is suggesting. Paul is recognizing something in the desires of people. In the context of 1 Corinthians, 7:9, he's also talking to both the unmarried and the widowed. So when Paul says is that Paul isn't saying you should marry because you have a burning desire. He's saying it is better for you to marry than to be consumed by the passion, by the burning passion, sexual lust and all that. It is better for you to be married.
Yeah, and there's actually a few different interpretations of that section of the scripture, which I have a different take on. But even if you follow it with that take on it, I think it's more of a concession than it is like if you really can't keep it in your pants, I guess it's better to get married than to commit these sins outside of it.
Yeah.
but I don't think that's the best. If you can't control it before you're married, get it under control, because marriage is like a band-aid.
Okay. I'll read from Corinthians 7:7. Yet I wish that all men were even as I myself am. However, each man has his own gift from God, one in this manner and another in that. But I say to the unmarried and to the widows that it is good for them if they remain as I. But if they do not have self-control, let them marry, for it is better to marry than it is to burn with passion. But to the married I give instructions, not I, but the Lord, that the wife should not leave her husband. So he's saying these things so he's making also a parallel, I believe, to that of Christ when it is better for you to lose an eye than to lose. It is better for you to lose a body part than it is to lose salvation. So Paul is emphasizing that it is much better for you to marry than to lose your salvation because you succumb to these passions. But he also gives instructions and warning in the next verse about leaving your husbands and fathers. Because not only could you if you're in the situation where you do not have the self-control and it is better for you to marry in this place, he tells you that it is better. But then he goes on to say, but to the married I give instruction, not I that gives you these instructions, but the Lord, that the wife should not leave her husband and vice versa, and vice versa. So he warns that you're not going to solve anything if you marry, then just leave. So he warns of multiple paths. That's what I'm trying to get at, right? It's better for you to lose your singleness than to lose your salvation, if that's the case. Paul also warns that if you commit to this, then commit to it. Don't marry because you feel like you have to.
You look that thoughtful, Monique.
Yeah, I have 1,000 thoughts running through my head, and a lot of them are, back in that time, it was a different time. We now have something called the internet, and he was a pastor and he was married and he couldn't control himself, but he ended up losing his whole pastorate, his whole church, and his family because he couldn't control himself. And internet pornography was his thing.
Yeah. So Monique, the only thing with that is that just as there is many women or many men around your living quarters, so your neighbors, you have other wives, as there is internet, it is still the same issue. There's just plenty.
So
right? Back in the apostles' time in Roman, there was probably a brothel at every corner.
Yeah.
But then you also have it. So it's the same as pornography now, just in a different sense.
But I'm just saying that if this is your thing that causes you to lose control, and you think that if you get married, then all of those sins are going to go away, that temptation will still be there. And I know for a fact that somebody who is wrapped up in pornography, their sexual expectations are going to be extremely different than reality. And a lot of them will forsake their spouse to go back to the pornography because they're just not getting that.
Well, I think a lot of people take these verses that Dave was talking about and say, in their head, they're like, this is how you fix this. We fixed my pornography addiction. We fixed my going out and sleeping with people by getting married. And they use this as an excuse, or they honestly think that's what's going to help.
It's going to fix me.
But then they don't realize the context of it and what the ramifications, like what Dave was saying about if you're married, get married, and stay married, don't go off and being unfaithful.
It's like a drug addiction or an alcohol addiction. Unless you do something specifically to help yourself, and only God can help you. And the funny thing is that this pastor actually ran men's groups to help men stop pornography addiction, only to find himself falling back in because he lost a sense of support by becoming the support for everybody else. You've got to be.
I also want to mention that what I'm saying, Paul is saying, you have to read it in almost in the chapter as a whole. because he actually anticipates what you were saying prior in verse 6. But this I say by of concession, not of command. So by it is granted. But he further in verses 4 to 5, he also then there's the wives do not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise, also the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Stop deriving one another except by agreement for a time, so that you may devote yourselves to prayer and come together again, so that Satan will not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. But this I say by way of concession, not of command. Yet I wish that all men, and then you can read 7, 8, and 9 in his context. Also anticipating everything we're saying prior, so you got to read.
And I get that, because we have in my marriage, we had gone over those verses 1,000 times and said the exact same thing 1,000 times. But when you are in addiction, and this may not be where Paul is going with his, maybe he didn't deal with that side of it that deeply. But if you are addicted, don't get into a relationship, because that's the first thing that's going to get destroyed. If you do not get healing for yourself, don't drag another person into your addiction, because that's
And that's what I was saying. Like, I think what happens is people take this verse out of context and they actually go, all I need to do to fix this addiction is get married, and then I won't have this temptation.
yeah.
And like, they actually honestly think that. And then there's a really big reality check.
Yeah.
And then it happened. Like, they get married. They totally think this is like, they're going to be turning their lives around. This will make it like, they won't have the temptation to go after this other stuff because they'll have marriage. And the problem is too, like, I think the Christian church has built up like marital sex, like it beyond when it
Like, it'll set you up into the heavens and the stars and all that kind of stuff. No.
yeah, if you just save yourself, then the best is yet to come. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. But I'm just saying, I think people take this verse out of context because they honestly think that it's telling them, if you're having this problem, go get married and it will fix this problem.
Yeah.
And,
I actually, you just reminded me of a story of a friend of mine a long time ago. And she was telling me that her daughter had just gotten married to her best friend. And after their first night, realized that her best friend was just that, friend. There was nothing else there. They thought they should have been perfect together because they were always together. They always did things together. They were the best of friends. And that was the best thing to marry, is your best friend. Apparently it wasn't. That when you do it out of desperation, because you think this is your only option and this must be it because he's the only person in my life and he's my best friend. And then you get married and realize that there is nothing there because he was only a best friend. That just,
it's just so many things. Yeah. Like, it just, like with temptation is that you're trying to fulfill that immediate desire.
yeah.
And like, the desire is not always a bad one initially. Like, the desire to get married is not a bad desire. The desire to be a parent is not a bad desire. But if we like cave into, even if the desire to have sex is not a bad desire.
It's when you cave in.
Like, yeah, it's when you get, if you do any of these things outside God's law or God's commands in it, then that's when things go wrong or you sin.
Yep.
Because like for me, like when I got married to my ex, like I was just desperate. That's what I said. Like I told it before in the podcast, like the entire time we were married, no matter how bad it got, all I was saying to myself was, at least you're still married. You are a wife. It is worth whatever it is that I'm going through because I am a wife. That's what I kept. And that's why whenever my ex said he wanted to get divorced, that's why my whole entire life fell apart. Not later when he told me he was having an affair. Because the whole thing I had grasped onto was that I am a wife.
Yep.
And that was taking, like, when I found out he was having an affair, it almost made things make sense to me. It's not like it made me happy or anything, but like all of a sudden things made sense. It was like a puzzle piece that was missing. But for me, like the whole point of the marriage was that I was a wife, not to be his wife, but to be a wife. And because that's what unfortunately, that's what the church sets you up for a lot of time as a woman.
Yep.
And you need to fulfill this wife and mother, like calling of God, pillar thing, which is not. I'm not denying the high calling of a wife and a mother, but it's not the only purpose of a woman, or the highest calling for every woman. But it's just, it sets you up for that. And I think as a church, we have, like, in the church, and hopefully as a ministry, what we do is we try not to set people up for that. Like, when you promise like the best, amazing sex ever, so long as you wait for that into the marriage, like, that's setting something up that's not there. Does it mean it's the worst sex? No, it just means it's sex. And it takes practice and time and getting to know each other and what each other likes. And it's something you build up to, from what I've heard. My experience with my ex was not the best template, but for what I've understood is that it's like something you practice and you get better at, and it becomes more enjoyable, and you get to know each other even more intimately, and it's like a learning thing. So I think when people say, oh, I just want to like sleep with them to make sure we're compatible, is it really a great excuse? Because it's like, you're not really super compatible at the beginning. I don't think you're two people that are trying to figure things out.
No, this isn't the movie where everything is just beautiful and perfect and the fireworks are going off all over the place. It's not.
And so I think we need to be careful when we're looking at anything in the Bible where we think it's the answer to our temptation, when it's not. Living your life for God and that God will help you through it. If I get married, then my sexual temptations will disappear. If I make a lot of money, then my temptations for more money will go away. Or if I give all my money away, then I won't have to worry about whatever ones you decide that are going to be the thing that fixes everything that's temptation-wise in your life. Like, it has to be like that you actually. It says that in that James verse, right? Like, about how, just a second, where is it? When it says that, or was it in that part, or is it part that I read elsewhere? Yeah, because it says, blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial. For when he has stood the test, he'll receive the crown of life, and which God has promised to those who love him. That's verse 12, James 1, verse 12. But it's not that you figured out a way to not be tempted or to go through the trial. It's that you went through the trial and you remained steadfast through it. It's not that there's some magical fix. God is the one who will help you through it. And if we don't make it through the trial, the temptation, then it is on us. We're the sinful natured person that we don't go through it. But it's not, I'll get through the trial, the sexual temptation, by getting married. That temptation is just going to come back again, and you can't just get married to another person, as much as some people like to think that's not my true love's over here, and then, oh no, that's not my real true love. My real true love is here, and they get multiple marriages.
Especially if you enter the marriage for that very reason, is just to get that sexual desire thing, and then you go, wow, this person isn't working for me. Maybe I will find somebody, and then you see.
But then the person who entered the marriage is not repentive.
But see, a lot.
If one does what Paul suggests, Paul is hoping, I guess, in a sense, that they are repentive of what adultery they have already committed in this regard. That's why Paul warns them. And that's why the Bible also warns of the adulterers.
Yes.
I think it's the people, like I said, who take it out of the context. Yeah. And they think that's the pill they need to take to get rid of the temptation out of their life. Yeah. I remember this one fictional storyline I was reading, and it was like a fantasy Christian one. And I really liked how they depicted sin. And it was basically like the darkness, they would say the spores would go within their skin. So when they did a certain thing, like the spores of this evil darkness would go in them. And while they could recover from it, that specific area of their body or whatever will be more susceptible or reawaken at times. And sometimes the reason they got the injury was because they had done something wrong. But it was interesting because it was like you could heal from it, but you were always susceptible in that spot because it had those like spores in them. And I think that's like the sin, like you can heal from, say, pornography. But unless God miraculously works a thing in your heart, which he can, in your body, in your heart, it doesn't mean that you're like never going to be tempted from it again. Like a person that's come out of drug addiction or alcoholism will probably tell you that it's not like a one and done. That's why Alcoholics Anonymous and stuff, like they have long-term people that work with you, and like you have your sponsor and things like that. And that's why they have these things, because it's not a one and done. Get married, no more temptation. Especially once you've imbibed in that sin, the temptation is more alluring and you're more easy to fall into that same sin.
Paul says
I
this.
know, but
Paul says this in Romans 6:19. I'm using an example from everyday life because of your human limitations. Just as you used to offer yourselves as slaves to impurity and ever-increasing wickedness, so now offer yourselves as slaves to righteousness, leading to holiness. So Paul is saying that once you offer yourselves as slaves to impurity and to ever-increasing wickedness, the wickedness will just keep increasing, in a sense.
yeah, if Paul's words could be taken so literal, none of the TV evangelists or pastors or Christian families ever got caught up in adultery, because it never happens in the church. There was a guy in our church. He was a handsome guy. And yes, I was attracted. But I noticed something very strange when I was going there, and it wasn't too long, and I'm going, why does it look like he's having a relationship with this woman just by the way they looked at each other? And that's odd. I must be mistaken, because she's married, and she was married, and she had 4 kids, but the 2 youngest kids were not her husband's. And it wasn't long before their relationship was discovered, and then they had to leave the church. They're now married to each other. She actually divorced her husband, saying, yeah, we're getting a divorce. I don't want to be married to you, and the last 2 children aren't yours, by the way. Wow, that's a totally different kind of special, I'd say. But so it happens in the church. People, as much as Paul has said all these wonderful things, people don't listen. People don't follow it. People don't believe that it's for their lives. They have their own excuses. We are sinful people. Yes, Christ has redeemed us, and yes, our sins are forgiven, past, present, and future. But if we ignore the temptation and we just follow into the sin because we think we deserve it, that's when we end up in trouble.
Exactly. And that's what I was saying. Like when you fall into the temptation, you have more difficulty resisting that temptation, or the more likelihood of falling into that same temptation, because you've created like the shortcuts to the sin. Essentially, you've gone through, Monique, you haven't not been involved in pornography, like watching it or anything. So your temptation towards it will be vastly different than mine, because I've been through that and I've had the easy ways to ignore the conscience and things like that.
It's quite
that
comfortable watching PG-13.
But I'm just saying, it's because I have struggled with that and fallen to the temptation in the past. So the draw of that is stronger on me than you, because I've made those roads already to it.
Yeah.
And
Not that
so
I've
it
never
doesn't
been
mean that I
exposed.
will fall.
Not that I've never been exposed to pornography, because I have, and those images are still. If I can, no, I don't want to see that.
All the way, right?
But yeah, thankfully I was able to dodge that bullet. But I had the opposite of having been molested as a child. So I did have the sexual temptation of wanting to be with somebody. And before I was a Christian, so I did have more than one partner in my life. And when I became a Christian, yeah, then it became a thing. So then it was like, how do I date? Because I need to get married, because, yeah, and that turned out badly too, because I didn't get proper direction. Instead, I got called a Jezebel.
If you want to know if Monique's a Jezebel, just listen to a couple of podcasts.
I'm just going to say, I'm not a Jezebel. So
doesn't mean that there's no way out of these things. God gives us a way out, and through His grace and through the Spirit, it gives us a chance against them, like the best chance, the chance to say no, the chance to not go with the temptation. So for a single person, yes, definitely the temptation of sexual purity is high on the list. But I think very high on the list that people don't think about is their desire for marriage is so high that they're tempted to forgo a lot. Maybe in purity's ways, because the other person has asked for something and you just give into it, which I also felt to, or even just like you marry someone who you actually shouldn't have, right? For whatever reason. There's many reasons why. But sometimes you don't find this out till later, and then he has to make the marriage work, depending on the situation. But it's just the fact that with single people, I think those are two of the many ones that we have to deal with in our lives, but too high, like temptation-wise. And I think people think about the sexual purity one, but don't necessarily think about the just desire for marriage being so high that they're the temptation to ignore red flags or godly inspiration just goes out the window. So I think that's one that's less talked about, less acknowledged.
I
And
think nowadays young people are shying away from relationships a little bit more. We're stuck on our phones and on our social media that we don't connect so easily anymore.
also what I've been reading is that many children or young people have seen their parents divorce and they don't want to go through that.
Yeah.
So they're not treating relationships the same way or as like all encompassing or that you can just keep going on to multiple people. Like they've seen the results of this and they actually are drawing back to having less partners.
Yeah.
Like a lot of younger people.
Yeah. Or just
Because they-
not wanting
they-
them at all. Because we know a few,
Yeah.
we know one girl, maybe two girls in particular who don't want to get married at all if they can help it.
Yeah. And I think it has a lot to do with how they see marriage being lived out by their parent and not in their community
Or
of
their culture
I
and
don't-
whatever too. You look at these countries where the birth rate was restricted, like China, and now they're starting to loosen that because they're finding nobody's having babies anymore. Nobody's getting married. People are more into doing their careers and stuff rather than having a relationship. So I think that's what we're finding with a lot of young people nowadays is that they're more intent on getting that career or doing things for themselves. They become a lot more about their own selves. So I'm wondering if this may be more in the 30s, 40s, 50s area where they're still of that mindset from back then that says, I still want to get married. But you're still seeing from young people in their 20s where they're on TikTok going, if I don't get married and I need to get married, and they're sobbing and crying. And is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
But maybe the teenagers are maybe not quite there yet. It's the 20
Yeah, just-
something, 20, 30 somethings. Don't be too desperate to have it
Yeah.
because it's not.
Marriage doesn't fix whatever's going on inside of you.
Yeah, there's only one
Mhm.
person that can do that, and that's Jesus Christ.
Amen.
And without him, you will be forever looking for that perfect love and will never find it.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, I think that everybody understands our view of temptation, at least at this moment. If you want to contact us, please find us on all the social medias and at our website, route77.ca. That's ROUTE 77.ca. And we'll see you here next time. Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Goodbye.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Route 77 podcast. We hope our discussion on temptation and singleness has provided you with some valuable insights and encouragement. Remember, you're not alone in this journey, and God's strength is made perfect in our weaknesses. If you have any questions, thoughts, or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, feel free to reach out to us on social media or through our website at route77.ca. Until next time, stay strong, stay faithful, and remember to live your single life to its fullest.